morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to another DxO webinar. I'm your host, Photo Joseph, and in the event that this is your first DxO webinar with me, let me give you a little explanation of how things work here with me. So I tend to move a little bit on the fast side, but the good news is that you will be getting a copy of this webinar in your inbox about 24 hours after this ends, so you will be able to go back and rewatch any part of it that you may have missed. If you do have any questions throughout, feel free to drop them in at any time. I will be going back and forth between doing the presentation and answering questions as we go, and as much as I can, I will try to integrate those questions, the answers to those questions, into actual demos. And towards the end, when we're wrapping up, I will endeavor to get any that I hadn't got so far. If at any time you have a question that you either don't get answered because I miss it, you don't think of it while we're doing this, you think of it later, feel free to hit me up on social media. The best way to find me is on Twitter. In fact, I'm going to hit send right now in the chat room, and you are going to get 3 links. You're going to get a link to my YouTube channel, my Twitter channel, and our Twitter handle, whatever account, and my Instagram. Go ahead and sub and follow and all those good things on all of those, and those are the best ways to reach me. Again, Twitter is probably the best, but all kinds of fun information out there. I should also just double check you all can see and hear me well. Let me take a quick look into the chat room if I can figure out where that's moved off to today. Oh, there it is. And let's just see here what's going on. Everybody can hear me and see me well, loud and clear. People are saying hello from Panama and all over the place. Sound and visual is working just fine. Awesome. Thank you, everybody. I really appreciate that. So today's session is, this one's a little bit more nebulous than past ones. Past ones have been very specific. We're taking this type of photo, we're doing this type of effect to it. We're taking these to black and white, or selective colorization, or making your sports photos pop, things like that. This one's a bit more squishy. I think it's a good word for it. It is enhancing your artistic photos. What's artistic? And specifically with Viveza. Now, Viveza is awesome, and it is one of the older tools that actually hasn't been updated in a while, so it doesn't even load as a Retina or high DPI tool. So if it looks a little bit crunchy on your screen, it looks that way on mine as well. But we are going to take a look at what it can do, and I'm also going to include how to integrate that with other tools, with other plugins. We're not going to only use Viveza, but every photo that I work with, I will start in Viveza. And I say this one's a bit kind of squishy and nebulous because what's an artistic photo? Who decides it's artistic? When I was first looking at this, and I'm going, I don't know what photos to use. And so I ended up choosing photos from my collection that are maybe a little bit more abstract in some cases. Not, you know, I don't consider myself a fine art photographer, so it's a little bit maybe harder for me to say this is an artistic photo. But I just try to do good photography. So anyway, so what I've chosen is a few that are, again, perhaps a little bit more abstract, a little bit more nebulous, but it doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, what matters here is the tools and learning how to use the tools. So that's my little spiel on that. We are going to be working primarily, actually I think entirely out of Photoshop today as the host. As I have pointed out before, and I'll point out again, what you use as a host is largely irrelevant to everything that we're doing today, because we are focusing on what you can do in the plugins in the Nik collection, not in the host itself. You can use Photoshop or Lightroom Classic if you are an Adobe subscriber. You can use Lightroom CC as well, although you don't have the smart object integration. And of course, you can use DxO's own, good grief, my brain has Photolab. There we go. Wow, it's just one of those mornings apparently. You can use DxO's own Photolab, which is included with the Nik collection, which allows you to operate using no other products at all, just the Nik collection and the Photolab that it comes with. The reason that that's important is because the Nik collection do operate as plugins. You can actually use them as standalone apps by simply dragging and dropping an image onto that app. If you look in the apps folder, you can just drag it onto there. But the Nik collection is not a raw decoder. So if you're shooting raw, as I'm sure everybody is, you do need to first convert it to something else. So it's really best to use a raw decoder app such as Photolab or Photoshop or Lightroom or Capture One or whatever you have, and then do your base raw processing there, and then send it off to the plugin. So that is that. So today we're going to be working mostly out of Photoshop. And one of the reasons I really like working out of Photoshop for this is the smart objects. And you're going to see some of that come into play today, how using smart objects and therefore smart filters gives me the ultimate flexibility. So there are a couple things you'll see here today that are unique to Photoshop, but as far as what we do in the filters, it doesn't matter what you're using. Let me take a quick look over at the questions, see if there's anything there I need to hit before I jump in, and we will be going. Ethereal, Jane said. There you go, Jane. That's a good word to describe it. Ethereal. And Richard's asking, please demonstrate the mask used by control points. So we will be talking about control points, definitely. You're asking how it differs from a luminosity mask. When I get to control points, I'll explain how they are. Since you know luminosity masks, you will understand the difference. I'll try to remember to kind of point out a little bit more differences as we get in there. All right, let's get this thing going, shall we? Again, in Photoshop, I'm going to start with this photo here. It's artistic, right? I don't know, girl blowing a bubble and the bubble's in focus and she's not. I kind of like it. So I'm going to start, as I always do, by hitting the auto button in the raw decoder. And that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm going to use what it gives me, but the raw decode is a good way to very quickly find out just what details are hidden in an image. Because if you have stuff in a raw image that's under or overexposed, the auto button is going to pull them all into range. And you may decide that you don't want that in case, and in fact, I think we're going to look at a photo later where we will see something we don't like. But if, you know, just in case I don't get to that, I'm going to show that to you first. But I always hit it just to see what happens. So in this particular photo example, I hit auto, and it doesn't do much, right? It brightened up the shadows in her face a little bit, maybe brighten up the background a little bit. Okay, that's good, and I think that's okay. Let me actually cancel this, open another photo, this one here, which is very deliberately shot underexposed. You can see that the foreground here is almost completely silhouetted. Let me make sure we reset. We are, yep. The foreground there is silhouetted, and this is intentional, right? This was shot in camera underexposed. But if I hit the auto button, suddenly I've got all this detail in the front. And I'm going, no, that's not what I wanted. I wanted that to be a silhouette. So in this case, the auto button doesn't work. And look, the sky got brighter and less saturated. No. So in this case, auto is not what I want to do. But I will still always hit that button just to find out what's in there. In that previous example with the street light, maybe I hit that and I go, oh, I didn't realize there was this detail in the foreground that I actually do want to maintain. Great. But in that case, I wouldn't. Anyway, so back to this photo here that we're going to use. I hit that auto button. I go, yep, that's good. I like it. It's a good starting point. Okay, let's open this up. Now, working out of Photoshop with the raw image, you open it into Camera Raw first. That's just how the process is. And then I've done whatever I've done here, and now there's the button that says Open Image. If I click that, it's going to render the file into pixels, into pure pixels, and off I go to editing, and I will not be able to get back to the raw file again. However, if I hold down the Shift key, this button converts to open object. And by opening it as an object, what this means, it is essentially a container holding the raw file, and I can open up that container and manipulate the raw file at any time. But there's more to it than that. By using a smart object, and I know it's a smart object because it's got this little, I know it's kind of hard to see. Oop, that reminds me, let me make my mouse a little bit bigger here as well. That little icon in the corner, there we go, close that. This little icon right there in the corner, that tells me it's a smart object. What this means to the Nik collection is that when I apply a filter, the filter gets applied as a smart filter, which means I can actually go in and re-edit the filter at any point. So again, this is why I like to use Photoshop, because you get the ultimate in flexibility. Now, in this case, I'm not going to go back and re-edit the raw file, but at any point I could. If I just double click on that, not there. If I double click on the icon, it opens up into the raw. See, we're back into Camera Raw, and I have all my raw controls in here. All right. This photo, let's just say for the sake of the demo that I want to post this to Instagram. It's a very Instagram-y photo, I think you'll agree. And when I post something to Instagram, I tend to want to take up as much screen real estate as possible. It's kind of general conventional wisdom to take up as much of the screen as possible, so when people are flipping by, they actually see your photo. And the crop ratio for Instagram is a 5:4 or 4:5 ratio. So I'll go up here to my ratios and I'll choose 4:5, and there it is. And now I can crop the image however I like. So let's just say, let's get that other bubble in the corner there, right about like so. Okay, and I crop that, and now that's cropped. Okay, great. So now I'm ready to go into my plugin, right? So I'm going to go up to the filters, and I'm going to go into Nik Collection, and I'll choose Viveza. And this is loading up as a smart object. So I'm going to be able to re-edit this, and I'm looking at this going, wait a second, I cropped it. Why is all this, what's going on here? We are seeing the whole image because we cropped a smart object, meaning that all we really cropped was the container. The full image is still there, which means the plugin is going to apply to the full image, which depending on what you do to the image in the Nik plugin might be irrelevant, right? If I just do, let's say I do a general saturation and exposure adjustment on this. If it's cropped or not, doesn't matter. But if I start adding things like a vignette or a frame or anything that is reliant on the edges of the photos, suddenly that's not going to work because my frame, let's just say I added a frame, and you can't do that in Viveza, but in another plugin here, let's say I added a frame all the way around this, it would be added around the whole image, but then when I applied it and I went back to Photoshop, it would be cropped as we saw it cropped, and the frame would be cropped off, and that would be totally weird. So we need to crop it completely before we get into the plugin if we're going to do that kind of work. So let me show you how to do that. And I'm going through this process because it can be a little bit confusing if you went through the steps that I just went through and you're going, hold on a second, I want to crop it, but I can't. You'll see. So I've cropped it, right? I've cropped it, the whole thing is still there. How do I know it's still there? I grab the move tool, and if I grab the image, look, see, the whole thing is there. It's just the container that was cropped. So I'm going to rasterize this image, rasterize that layer. Now by doing that, I have just lost the ability to re-edit the raw file. So that's important. If you're going to do this, you got to be aware of what you're doing, that you are throwing away that ability to re-edit the raw file. Now this should be, if I had it set up properly, a 16-bit file. Where are we? Mode 16 bits. Yep. So I got 16 bits of data. All the data that was in that raw file is still accessible. I just don't have the raw decoder tools to get to it. So again, important to know. Okay, now that I've rasterized it, it is still actually the whole image, right? I still have the whole thing. So now I need to crop it again. And this time when I crop it, I hit the C key to bring up the crop. I'm going to make sure that this little option is enabled, delete cropped pixels, important to ensure that's enabled there, and crop. And now when I grab the move tool, we'll see I have actually cropped the whole image. Okay, so now I've cropped it. Now I'm ready to go into the Nik filters. Almost. One more thing that I want to do here is I want to reconvert this back into a smart object. Now this is not going to magically restore raw editing, but by converting it to a smart object means that I will be able to re-edit the filter that I apply at any time. And this is a really important part of the workflow. So even though what I just did to get here was definitely the long path, purely at the sake of showing you kind of the process of how this could work, it's important to know that if you do want to crop your image, or if you're bringing an image that isn't raw, if you want to have the ability to re-edit the filter later, you got to convert it to a smart object. So I do that the same way that I rasterize it, simply right click on it, and in this case, now convert to smart object. Now that I've done that, well, almost done that, waiting for that to finish, there we go. Now that I've done that, there's that little smart object icon again. And now anything that I do to this image, to this container, the original image will still be protected, meaning that I can come back and re-edit the filter at any time. So with that said, now let's finally get into the filter, get into Viveza, and start working with this. And I'm also going to pop over the questions, see if anything came up over there. Would be helpful if you enlarge the cursor. Sorry, Joel, I just did that for you. Yep, a couple people asking me to enlarge the cursor. Sorry, I forgot to do that in the beginning. What would happen if you crop the photo in Camera Raw instead of Photoshop? Well, that's a great question. We're actually going to see that later. So thank you for asking that. That is very good. Herb says, when you open a raw file in Photoshop as a smart object, does it modify the raw file itself? No, nothing can modify the raw file. The raw file, think of it this way, the raw photo, the raw file is purely data. It is not an image. And you could argue every image is just data, but let's not go that far. The raw file itself, the raw image, cannot be modified. You cannot save something as a raw photo. I cannot open a raw file, make a change to it, and save it as a raw file. That is not possible. What you'll see happen in the case of Photoshop is, or Lightroom, or really anything where you're doing work to the raw file, if you have visibility of the kind of file structure, which you would if you're doing, if you're working in Adobe Camera Raw, you will see what's called a sidecar file. It's a separate file that lives next to the photo that includes all the instructions that are applied to that raw photo. In fact, this is a really good question. I think I want to hit this. I'm going to cancel out of here. I want to really make sure this point is driven home because I think it's a really good question. Let me let's see here. I want to do this. Let me go back into these reveal. Here we go. Okay, so this is my photo that I'm working in the Finder. And let's say I'm going to take this one here, this one of the buildings. You see it's a raw file, and there's no sidecar file next to it, right? We're not seeing one. So that means I have not yet done anything to this in Camera Raw. Let's go into Photoshop, and I'm going to open this in Camera Raw, and I'm going to make a change to it and do a big exposure drop. And I'm just going to hit done. I don't even apply it. I just hit done. If I go back to the Finder, there is now this sidecar file. This sidecar file is just a bunch of text, but this includes the instructions to drop the exposure. So if I go back into Photoshop and I open that again, we're going to see those instructions already applied. However, let me cancel this, go back to the Finder and delete that XMP file, back to Photoshop, open that picture, that same picture again, and we are back to the original source. The instructions to darken it have been deleted. The raw file is always untouched. So, a little bit of a sidebar there, but hopefully that was helpful to you who asked the question and to others as well. All right, moving on, back into Viveza. So what are we gonna do to this? I think the first thing I wanna do is darken her skin a little bit. The highlight on here, the part of her skin that's in the sun is so bright that your eye's not really drawn to the bubble immediately. So that's what I'm going to start with. Now I do have global controls here in Viveza. I have a levels and curves that is a global control. And I have global controls here. You see it says global. I have brightness, contrast, saturation, structure, shadow, warmth, red, green, blue, and hue adjustments, and a color tint as well. So all of these as global adjustments. All of those same things can be applied locally using the control points. So we're going to start with a local adjustment to the brighter part of her face, and we're going to do that with a control point. Now the interface here is a little bit interesting in that it changes as you move around the tool. It's really important to know if you're using the Nik Collection that these tools, each Nik plugin, each Nik filter, if you will, was developed one after the other after the other. These weren't all developed at the same time and released at once. The history of these tools goes back almost 20 years. And as a new tool was developed, there were new paradigms that were introduced to it, new ways of working. And so what it means is, unfortunately, the entire collection doesn't necessarily work the same way. Sometimes one tool works a bit differently than another, and so you do have to kind of learn each one a little bit individually to a degree. It's easy enough to do, but it's just an important thing to understand about it. In this case, the way that Viveza works is you have, as I pointed out, global adjustments. So I could, let's say, take the brightness of the whole image up or down here, and you can see that's being applied everywhere. Or if I want to do a local adjustment, I grab a let me resize my window a little bit so I can see my controls. There we go. If I do a local adjustment, I do that by adding a control point, clicking somewhere on the image, and now I have all those same controls here, the brightness, contrast, saturation, and so on. But you'll see they're also repeated over here. This is unusual that you see them all repeated over here. If I take brightness here, you'll see that it's adjusting the slider not only here, but also down here. And you'll notice that here it says selective. That's one of your indicators. It's selective. If I click anywhere on the interface to deselect the control point, this changes back to global. So it can be a little bit confusing as you're going back and forth if you're not aware of it, but that is effectively what it is. And the only difference here between these two little boxes is fewer or more controls. Do you want fewer controls? Do you want more controls? I'm just going to leave it on more. Okay, so I've added this control point to the bright part of her face, and I've adjusted the brightness of that. So I brought it up, but let's say what I wanted to do is bring it down a little bit. Well, what is actually happening here? What is this mask? And for our viewer who asked about the masks earlier, here's how these masks, these control point masks, are created. Every time you drop a control point, a new mask is built, is generated in real time without any kind of brushing or gradients or anything else. The mask is generated in real time based off of the chrominance and the luminance of the pixels that you clicked on. What that means is the color values and the brightness of the pixels that you clicked on. So when I click on her bright face here, her face has obviously it's not exactly the same hue everywhere, but it is a relatively same hue across her face and a relatively same brightness, luminance level across her face, especially when you compare the bright part of her face to the dark part of her face, the part that's in the sun versus the shadow. The mask is built around that bright part of her face. Now, it's not going to be a hard edge mask as if you went in there with a pen tool. It is a very, very gradual and very precise mask, again, based off of those chrominance and luminance values. And for my friend who asked about the luminosity mask, it is similar to a luminosity mask in everything that I just explained. However, luminosity masks are more about just the luminance, not luminance and chrominance, and so this is a kind of a hybrid of that and something else. So it's a really interesting way of doing it. Now you can go in here and view your mask by, so here's the control point list. There's the one that I just created. I only have one. If I click on this little checkbox here, it shows me the mask that's been created. And so now as I drag this around, I can see what part of the image is going to be affected. And what's really interesting about this particular photo is look at the line around her face, that border around her face as it transitions from highlight to shadow. In fact, let me just delete that mask real quick. As it transitions from highlight to shadow, I'll zoom into this a little bit, you see there is a range where we have kind of a very similar value up to here, and then suddenly there's this transition line to here. So it's that fall off curvature of light between the edge of her hat, the rim of her hat that's causing the shadow. And what this means is we have to be actually a bit careful, because when I create the control point, just drop the control point there. Let's view that control point as a mask again. Depending on where I position it, I could end up with this hard line that is going to be affected. So if I, with the mask creator right there, was to go in and take the brightness down, we could end up, and I'm going to overdo it here on purpose here, but you end up with this weird line happening in there. Now let's just say, for the sake of the demo, that this effect, this level of brightness adjustment is what I wanted. Clearly, though, I can't have that funky line in there. That's not okay. In this case, what I would do is simply move this around just a little bit, move it around subtly, and look for that line to go away. And you could either do it in this view, or if you really want to see what's happening, go back to the mask view and move this around until it affects the area you want it to affect without generating that line. In this case, I'm going to have to go to a little bit brighter part of her skin. There we go. And now we're not getting that line as much. Ooh, there we almost got it. Just got to find just the right spot. There we go. And see, now we don't have that hard line. It's the transition, just like the actual transition of the image. So it's a much cleaner path. Now we are still getting a line here, so we may have to compensate for that as well. And we can do that with multiple control points. But the point here is simply that you sometimes have to be very careful about the mask and where you drop it to ensure that you aren't getting some weird artifacts because of the inherent values of the photo that you're adding it to. All right, so I've added this there. Now I brought the brightness way down, so that's not good. Let's bring it, I just want to bring it down a little bit. Let's say right about like so. Let me zoom back out of this thing so you can see the whole picture. And good. Okay, so I've darkened her face there a little bit. And if we are, so I'm actually kind of seeing a little bit more of a line in there that I want to. I think what I'll do is add another control point right onto the line itself and kind of split the difference, make that a little bit less bright. And there we go, look at that. We've cleaned that up by adding a second mask just on the line area and darkening it not as much as the original one. So I'm kind of have this graduated, is that right? Graduated change from no effect to the full effect. That has actually worked out quite well in this case. So, all right, cool. So we're good with that. I'm going to leave that as it is. I want to draw a little bit more attention to the bubble. So I'm going to add another control point to the bubble. And this is going to be tough because the bubble itself doesn't really have unique color or luminance to it. It's really a shape. And so I'm going to have to go into my mask view and figure out what part of that bubble I want to select. And maybe we'll make this selection area a little bit smaller as well, and find a spot of it to highlight. So what I'm going to do is try and get kind of the edges of the bubble, and you can see kind of some of those details in there, and then raise up the structure and maybe the brightness of those and see if it makes that bubble stand out a little bit more. So let's see here. Let's try bringing up the brightness a little bit. Actually, let's try a little contrast as well. Maybe a little bit of structure. That's where I really wanted to go. Yeah, there we go. The structure is really kind of enhancing those edges there, and it's subtle, right? This is very, very subtle. But let's do a side-by-side before and after, and you can see that bubble is just popping out a little bit more. That face is a little bit darker in there. I think we could also do a overall darkening and brighten up just the bubble itself. And to do that, I'm not going to rely, I am going to still use a control point, but I'm not going to be trying to rely on getting a particular part of the bubble. I'm actually going to try and get as much of that area as I can to brighten it up and darken the whole image behind it. Now you can't, when you create a control point, you can't tell it to affect the inverse of the control point. So I don't have a way to say drop a control point on the bubble and affect everything outside of it. I can only affect what's inside of it. So what I'll do is darken the entire image, and I could do that using my curves in here, or I could use the global sliders at the top. I'm going to do it though by dropping the whole curves down and then adding a control point and dropping it over the bubble, but kind of on her face area, because it's really her skin tone that we're seeing through the bubble, and brighten that up a little bit. And just to bring a little bit more attention to what is in that bubble. And maybe I make a duplicate of this control point by option dragging it, and I've duplicated that, and look, now I've caught the color highlights on that bubble, bringing that up a little bit, looking pretty good. And if I want to knock back the background a little bit more, but not as globally, let's do that as well. We'll add another control point. Let's go for the highlights in her hair. Darken that a little bit. There we go. Option drag over to here to do another darkening of the highlights of her hair. And now we really start to see how this is coming together. So it's not a massive change, right? This filter. The Viveza tool isn't about doing massive changes or not suddenly making it, black and white or look like film or anything. This is really about very precise corrective exposure and color enhancements. And in this case, that's what I've done here. So I like it. I'm gonna hit OK. This is gonna render back as a smart object, and we're gonna do something else with this photo too before we're finished with it. Let me take a look back in the questions though, see if there's anything else. James saying, if this crop needed to be done in all Nik Collection, I'm sorry, I don't understand your question. And Robert's saying that my screen is lagging behind the vocals. Well, that's definitely not good. Let me do this. Let me make sure my backup there is, you know what, 1 second, sorry about this. I just realized. Sorry about that. When I came in this morning, I forgot to pause the backup on another system, which definitely would be hogging bandwidth and could have caused some lagging there. So hopefully that'll free up and catch up in just a moment there. My apologies for that, folks. Okay, anything else? Can you duplicate a control point and leave it in the exact same position to double the effect? Yes, there's no duplicate command specifically. You would just option drag it, but you would option drag it and just put it back where it was. Now that I've said that, let me just double check. I'm pretty sure that you can't just simply duplicate it. So, incidentally, what I've just done here, now somebody's walking in my door. Hey, sorry guys, that kind of a morning. I'm doing it. Appreciate it. That kind of a morning, FedEx has shown up. Okay. Back in Photoshop here, smart object, smart filter, that means I can double click on that filter and it brings me back into Viveza. And look at this, we are here with all my control points. Okay, so we wanted to see about duplicating. Yeah, I can't just right click and duplicate. It's funny, sometimes you use a tool a bunch and someone asks you something simple and you're like, I don't think it works that way. But if I wanted to duplicate this to double up the effect, I would hold down the option key. So you see the cursor's changed to the little plus guy, and then drag that. So now I got a second one, and then I would just position it right back where it was. That's how I would go about doing that. I don't know that there would be much of a benefit to doing that, to be honest. I think unless, well, I guess if you had already cranked, let's say, the brightness all the way up and you needed more, then okay, that would be a reason to do it. But yeah, otherwise, for the most part, you shouldn't need to. If you're duplicating it, it would be to apply it in a different area. All right, let's cancel out of there and we grab one more question, then we'll move on. People saying there's a lot of lag. Hopefully that is solved now. The lag, yay, already better. People are saying good. Sorry about that, folks. David is asking, does the sequence of the sliders, brightness, contrast, saturation, structure, imply a preferred workflow, adjust brightness first, then contrast, etc.? Excellent question. No, it does not. Okay, so this is an important thing to understand about the workflow of certain tools. And again, this gets into that some tools work differently than others. In the situation of anything that has control points with multiple sliders on it, it doesn't matter what order you do them in. The end result is it's called a concatenated result, where basically the sum of everything is what the output is. So if you were to, let's say, brighten the image plus 15 and then darken the image minus 15, you would end up with 0. You wouldn't end up with an image that had been brightened and then darkened, which would not look as good, right? If you took an image and you brighten it and you hit save, whatever, and then you darken it, you save again, that result is not where you started from. You have just brightened and darkened pixels. When you're adjusting anything in the control points, it doesn't matter what order you do them in. It is purely, they're in an order of just, I guess, logic in the sense of things are grouped together, but that doesn't mean that you need to go in that order. You can go in any order you want and adjust as needed. That changes when you get into a tool like Color Effects Pro, which actually, let's just go there next. We'll go into Color Effects Pro, where the order does make a big difference, not of the sliders, but the order of the effects. So I'm going to take the same image with Viveza already applied to it and take this into Color Effects Pro. Now in Color Effects Pro, the way this tool works is you have a series of effects or filters. Here they're called filters, filter library, and they are added over here on the right, and you can order them however you want. So in this case, this is actually perfect. Black and white is already up on here. So black and white conversion, if I turn that off, we'll see the original. In Color Effects Pro, as I add another filter, let's go to all, as I click on a filter, it replaces the filter that is currently selected. So black and white just became colorized. I click on film effect vintage, it's now there. Click on, low key, and now that's there. If I want to add another filter, I click on add filter, and then I go in and I add another one. So now I've got low key and detail extractor, and then I click on add filter and I add a graduated color to it. So I can add all these filters to it. The order of these filters absolutely matters. The order that you play with the settings inside of that filter are just like the control points, totally irrelevant. You can adjust these back and forth, slide it up and down, all you want, doesn't matter what order you go in, doesn't matter. But the order of the filters themselves is a big difference. And here's the best way that I can show this to you is, let me clear all of these out. I will add a color, let's see here, color stylizer, color stylizer. So we've just added this kind of sepia-ish effect to the picture. And let's see, I want to make this really obvious that it's got that sepia on there. There we go. Okay, so kind of add the sepia effect to it. And then I'll add black and white on top of that. So I add filter and I go for a black and white conversion. The image is now black and white because I took an image that had been turned sepia with that color stylizer, and then I took that and made that black and white. If I, however, go in here and I take this black and white and I move it before the color stylizer, now it was turned into black and white, and then it had the color added to it. So in this situation, the order matters very, very much so. It is a pass through. The image is going from top to bottom. It basically cascades down through the filters. So in this situation, the order of the filters matters very much. In the situation of the individual sliders, it doesn't matter what order you do them in. You will encounter filters like Analog Effects Pro, where it would appear to matter because you have a stack of filters here on the right, except that you can't reorder them. So that is designed and locked into a specific workflow order. So again, every tool is a little bit different. Color Effects Pro is by far the most flexible tool in the collection, giving you the ability to do the most things because you have so many filters to work with, and you can rearrange them in any order, and you have essentially an infinite number of possible results out of all the different adjustments, all of the different filters and all of the adjustments you have within them. So that said, let's move on from this photo. I'm bored with this picture now. Let's move on to something else. All right, we close this and let me see which photo. I almost forgot which one was next. Ah, yes. Can we do this? Ah, sure, we'll do this one. I almost skipped this one, but we'll do it. Okay, so this is a close-up of a door knocker on a brass or copper, whatever that is, copper, right? Wall or door or something. Cool, right? Okay, neat texture, neat color in there. Definitely a little bit on the flat side. We look at the histogram in here in the raw and we can see it's quite flat. So again, I'll hit that auto button. Nice, that expands it out quite well. Actually, I did a pretty good job right there on its own. I think we're good there. Good, I'm gonna leave it like that. Open object. So again, hold down Shift key to go into open object, and let's take this into Viveza. So this time in Viveza, I'm going to start with a global correction. Let's get rid of the before and after. And I'm going to start with a global structure adjustment. Structure is something that I think a lot of people are familiar with. Technically it is a micro contrast. It is a contrast that's added between the lighter and darker parts of the image. And the result of it is you end up getting a lot of detail getting pulled out in a really quite beautiful way. Right, so there's the image with 0 structure, and there it is cranked up. We take it all the way up to 100. It's a bit much, but you can really see the effect there. In fact, let's do a little before and after. This is kind of neat, by the way. You have this before and after slider in here, so you can do it this way. You can rotate that if that makes more sense for your image, or you can do a side by side, which you've already seen, and you can do it, rearrange them however you want in there. So I like this view because you really see the before and after all the time. But honestly, I'm usually just in this view, and if I want to see the preview, the before, I would just turn off the preview, and that's another way to do it as well. It's just up to you, whatever you like. Okay, so this structure is a bit strong, so let's dial that back a little bit. In this case, let's say I want to enhance the reds. Right, the bluish green tones are beautiful in there. The original copper behind it, is it copper or brass? Somebody tell me in the comments, please. The original reds behind it are a little bit muted. I want to amp those up a little bit. So I am going to grab a control point, click on an area that's got a bunch of that red on it, and just crank up the saturation on that. And we can see right away that it is doing a nice job of bringing up the reds. It is hitting the blues a bit. So let's take a look at the mask and see exactly what's being affected. So here we have it. You can see that red is primarily affected, but there's a little bit in the handle being got, a little bit of this blue background being caught as well. And so I can move this around to maybe try and find an area that is a little bit more isolating. So let's just try that a little bit. And that's, pretty good. We're still not, it's not like a pure isolation, but it's pretty good. Back out of there. And we can see that the saturation is definitely enhanced on the red, but it is, again, it is also enhancing the blue a little bit. And it makes sense, right? I mean, there's, like, if you look in the blue here, it is a blue over that original red, so it is kind of showing through a little bit, but I want to protect it. I don't want that to get enhanced. So I'm going to grab another control point. I'm going to drop it right on that blue, and I'm not going to change anything. But did you notice when I dropped it on there that the blue went back to the way it was? Let me do that again. I'll delete that. There's the affected colors. Let's just take the saturation down to normal, back way up again. And then I'm going to take that other control point, and as soon as I click on here, boom, it protects that area. And now that area does not have that added saturation. And if there's still some seeping through, I could even go in there and reverse the saturation. Let's dial it back down again. And in this case, remember I was talking earlier about how the overall effect is concatenated. That's what's happening here. If I do a brightness up, or in this case, saturation up and saturation back down, I'm not desaturating an oversaturated image. I'm returning it back to zero saturation, or wherever you put it. So very, very powerful tools in that sense. All right, let me do the same thing over to this part of the wall, the door, whatever here. I'm just going to option drag this control point over there and drop it onto there. Looking pretty good. Let's make that a little bigger. Let's go ahead and reveal that control point. And we can see here, oh, we're getting a lot of spillover onto here. So I don't want that spill. So let's add another control point. There we go. And start to protect the area here. And let's hide the mask on that. There we go. Hide that mask so we're only looking at the effect of this area here. And we can expand that to make it a little bit bigger. There we go. Now we're really getting just that area there. In fact, let's take this other protective one, drag that over. And remember, I'm seeing what I'm seeing because of the masks that are on or off in here. The only mask that I'm looking at is control point 3, this one here. That's the one that I am using to saturate the reds. The others are just there to protect the other areas. So now as I turn that off and I take that saturation up or down, we see it really is affecting just that red area there. Pretty good, pretty clean in there. Okay, I like it. Hit OK, and off we go. Take another quick look at the questions and see what's there. No lag now. Excellent. Good, 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 good. Thanks again, guys. Sorry about that. Jane Sydney says, you just talked about cropping, then rasterizing before going into Viveza, correct? Is this true for all other Nik collections, silver effects, etc.? Yes, because remember, the Nik filter is not processing the raw file. And if it was, then you wouldn't be able to do the crop and vignetting around the crop. So you need to send just the pixels. But because we're working with a smart object, we're technically sending just the container. The container is in that shape, and whatever we drop into that container affects the image underneath it. So, so yes, you do, if you wanted to crop and add a border around something or a vignetting or something that is reliant on the actual shape aspect ratio of that container, then yeah, you're gonna have to crop it before you go into there. Super important to do. Gary says there is a duplicate button. You're right, there is a duplicate button in there. Now that you've said that, if I select it, let's see here. Is there a duplicate in this one? Oh yeah, there we go, duplicate. It doesn't duplicate it in the same position though. Did you see that? It offset it a little bit. So personally, I would rather just option drag it. But thank you. See, you don't use a button and you like forget that it even exists. Okay, so that's what I want to do that one. I like it. I mean, that's good enough, right? That's a cool image. All right, next. Let's move on. Next one. Next one's going to be a bit more advanced. Let's see here. Let's grab this picture here. Okay, so what we've got here is a very silhouette-y type image, sunbeam coming through a little hole in the wall, hitting her in the eye. We're getting a little bit of this sunbeam streaking past her face, and that is what I want to focus on. That is an area that I really want to enhance because that is like, I think it's just beautiful there. I want to pull that out, really isolate it against her face, make that a little bit more enhanced. So let's hit the auto button here, see what happens. I already know it's not going to be anything good. Hit auto and way too much detail. I don't want all this. So I'm going to just revert that. Let's go back to default on there. And I honestly, I don't think there's anything I'm going to do to this image. Maybe take the blacks down a little bit, make it even darker, maybe tiny bit. It's fine. Let's open that up as an object. Okay. Let's take this into Viveza. So again, the main thing I want to do here is I want to take that sunbeam just crossing her face and pump it up a bit. So let's grab a control point, drop it onto the sunbeam part of her image, of her face, take a look at the mask and see what we've got. The whole picture, the whole face. Like, this is not isolating it at all, is it? Well, that means that we are not going to be able to enhance the sunbeam based off of a mask on the sunbeam, but we're still going to be able to do this. Let me show you. All right, let's hide that mask. First things first, I'm just going to brighten this up a little bit. So I've dropped it onto that sunbeam, so we're brightening that area. And because as we're brightening it, we are seeing a little bit more separation, but we've also brightened the outside of her face, which I don't want. That's okay. All right, brighten that up a little bit. Let's find just the right spot. Let's call it, we'll call it there. Now let's add another control point. I'm gonna drop that on the shadow part of her face right above. I'm gonna take the brightness down a little bit. Even though we are not specifically masking out the sunbeam because the tonal values are just too close, because we are brightening focused on this part of the face, darkening focused on this part of the face, we are able to massage that sunbeam out a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and add another darkening one below the sunbeam. Now let's see if I can bring that sunbeam up just a little bit more. Maybe take this one down a little bit more, and I'm just kind of striking that balance in there. It's very subtle. It's very subtle, but I am pulling that beam out. And if we look at the before and after, you can see that. In fact, now that I'm looking at the before and after, so very important to toggle the before and after on there. I'm seeing a little bit, let me do that again. I'm seeing a little bit of a spot. Like, you don't really see the spot effect on her face until I toggle it. And then you go, oh, yeah, it does have a little bit of a spot to it. Okay, well, then let's do another one. Let's option drag this out to make another one of these. And so it is still kind of a spot, but it's going to be a much, it's a second spot that we're just kind of overlap with the first one. In fact, we could probably make this a little bit smaller too. There we go. We're starting to see it, and we're starting to get that sunbeam out a little bit more. Let's toggle that on and off. I dig it. There we go. Yeah, it's definitely coming through. Okay, so that's the first step to it. All right, next, if we do a quick little global brightness adjustment, pull this up, we'll see that we can see these crescent moon shapes on our hat. I want to pull one of those out a little bit. I want to make that stand out as if there's a little bit of light hitting that. Okay, let's put the global brightness back down to 0, add a control point. Where did it go? Let me brighten up the whole thing because I've now lost that. There it is. I'm going to position this, this control point right on the moon. Let's make that a little bit smaller in there. Take my global brightness back down, and now take the control point on that moon and brighten it up a little bit. And it's going to be just like what we were doing earlier. We're going to have to add another one to the background there to protect a little bit. We have a little bit more separation than we did before here, than we did over here. Not much though, so we're still going to have to be pretty careful about it. So let's bring the brightness down. Actually, when we need to bring it down, we can just use it as a protection point. There we go. That's good. So we can see it, right? It's barely there, but we're seeing it. So we're seeing the sunbeam on her face, and we're seeing the sunbeam, or we're seeing the moon itself a little bit more. Okay, I'm down for that. Great. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and hit okay on this. So now I've done the work on the sunbeam, done the work on the crescent moon, and I'm thinking, okay, this is cool and all, but I actually want to crop this. I want to make this kind of a cinematic look. I want to do like a full-on 16:9 or maybe even a wider aspect ratio. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and crop that. Bring up the crop tool, and let's change this to let's do like a 2.4 to 1, like full-on cinematic 2.4 to 1 aspect ratio. There we go. And we're gonna crop it. Let's do right about like so. Excellent. So I hit OK, and hit OK, and you're going to see the filter get reapplied. You're going to see it render out again. Well, I guess it just happened quickly. And we're still getting the same effect. Nothing is changing here, and that's good. Okay, so we're good here. But remember, we still have the full image in here. So this effect, this Viveza effect that we've applied, still lines up with everything in here. What if I then want to add a vignette to this? I want to, in fact, you know what I'm gonna do next? I'm gonna take it black and white and add a frame. Let's go full on picture frame on it. Okay, that might be a bit much, but whatever. We're gonna do something that is going to be reliant on this aspect ratio, which, as I showed you before, in fact, let me just to really drive this point home, let me take this without doing anything else into Silver Effects Pro, and I'll add a border to it And then just in case you're not clear what I'm saying the problem is, you're gonna see it right now. Let's just go in here, and we're not gonna do anything fancy. I'm just going to take the default black and white, but I'm going to add a, where are we? Vignette, burn edges, where's my, oh, here we go, image borders, and let's put a big white border around the whole thing. You can kind of already see what's gonna happen, can't you? I hit okay, and here we go. See, we're getting the border just on the sides here, not on the top. If I pull this down, oh look, there's the border on the top, but that's not what I wanted. That doesn't work. Okay, so let's get rid of that Silver Effects Pro filter. That is definitely not working here. So now it's rendering out with just the Viveza again. All right, so we're back to just Viveza. I want to crop this out so that I can send it to the Silver Effects Pro. Now, I could, if I wanted to make this easy, I would simply render this out. Simply go here to rasterize this layer. I'll just go ahead and do it. And that renders everything, flattens everything, and now I can recrop and send off to the plugin. But I don't want to do that because that means I'm giving up the control that I have in Viveza. So if I wanted to go back and make some changes to Viveza, I can't anymore. All right, so I'm going to hit undo, and let's approach this a different way. If I just crop the image, we already know that it's not going to actually crop it. So I have to rasterize it before I can crop it. So it's like, well, I can't do both. You can do both. This is the trick. All right, here's what I'm going to do. Here's my original smart object with the smart filter applied to it. I'm going to duplicate that, Command J. And the top one here, I'm going to get rid of that Viveza filter. Let's just get rid of that guy. Don't need it. And I'm going to hide, let's call this my original, and we're going to call the top one my cropped, even though I haven't cropped it yet, but that's what we're going to do. Okay, so the original is hidden. It's still here, right? It's still there with the Viveza applied to it. Show my cropped one. Same image, no Viveza applied to it. It is not yet cropped. That's okay. We're going to bring up the crop tool, make sure delete crop pixels is set, and apply that. And now, give it a moment to think. It has to think through the application of the filter underneath. It doesn't actually change anything, but it still has to process it. Now, it's not cropped. Why isn't it cropped? I didn't rasterize it, right? See, you got to do these things. So let's go in there. Rasterize the layer. Let's crop it again. Crop, delete crop pixels. Boom, apply. Think about that. I didn't rasterize it, did I? I hope I didn't. There we go. Now it is actually cropped. Okay, so now I want to reapply the smart filter, the Viveza filter, onto this. I don't have to redo all the work. I've got it backed up over here. But I can't just apply this to it because this is a smart filter on a smart object. This isn't a smart object. So let's convert that to a smart object. Now remember, it is not automatically giving me my raw controls back, but it is still a smart object, which means I can take my filter and I can option drag that onto here, duplicate that smart filter onto this smart object, and now that is applied. But did those control points line up? Probably not. So let's go back into Viveza, and sure enough, they're off. Not by much, but they are off. Now, in most cases, most filters, I could simply select all of these and move them all at once. For some reason in Viveza, it doesn't. So unfortunately in Viveza, you do have to go in and kind of move them individually. We don't really need to move all of them, but let's move these down into place there. Most of the other tools, when you do this, all of the control points will move at once if you move them around. So this is a bit of a unique situation, but that's okay there. Let's see here. Oh yeah, see, we're darkening that. Let's get that in the right spot. Pull that down a little bit more, pull that down a little bit more. Dig it. Okay, so now I hit OK, and those Viveza control points that I'd added before, I've had to move them, but they're now still in place. Now at this point, I can go ahead and take this into my Silver Effects Pro. And if I wanted to do something here, like add that frame to it, it is going to add where it should be. So we'll do that. There's the picture. Let's actually try a different look. Let's go for, that's kind of cool. High structure, harsh. Look at that, really pulling that beam out. Digging that, digging that. Let's see if there's another one that might look better. Love the fact that we have these big, huge thumbnail previews over here on the left so we can see exactly what's going to happen before we apply it. Definitely got some good effects in here. That's kind of cool. A bit much. It really brought up a lot of stuff. There's that earlier one I liked better. Let's go back to high structure smooth, high structure harsh. We'll use this one. Okay, so that one, and then I will add my border to it. Different types of borders in here, or because it's kind of a cinematic look, probably wouldn't really add a border, but what I would add is a vignette. So let's go to vignette, add a lens fall off vignette, and I really darken that down, and that's going to be applied around there. But just to make it super clear that we are actually getting the border that we want, I'll go ahead and apply that, hit OK, and now we're going to get that border applied where it should be. And there you go, and there it is. So that's that process. So I'm showing you very much a convoluted workflow, but it's just kind of to show some of the flexibility when you're working this way. All right, let me see if there's any other questions we're gonna get to, and then we got 10 minutes left. Let's see if we have time to do another image. Great image quality, thank you, Jorge. Nicholas says, size of the selection point circle does what? Excellent question. Okay, so let's go back into, let's actually not do this one. Oh, too late. Let's cancel that. Let me just open up a whole new one. Makes it a little bit easier to see. We'll do this picture here. All right, so this photo. Oh, someone had asked about cropping inside of the raw image. So let's do that in here. I'm going to do two things. I'm going to straighten that image, and actually we'll just straighten it. That's fine. Open that as a smart object. Because this has been rotated inside of the container. Oh, actually, ooh, maybe you're right about that. I was thinking that it didn't work because I don't usually do that, but let's try this real quick. Okay, I'm bouncing around in questions here. I'm going to apply a border to this real quick. That's actually very interesting. This might actually work, which I did not expect. Border, border, border. Hit OK. It does. Fascinating. So if I go back into the raw image, let's see what happens now if I crop this even farther. Oh, this is going to, the container is not changing size, so this is definitely going to break it. So you have to do it before you go into the container. Oh, this is very interesting. Huh, I may have to explore this a little bit more. Yeah, because now it's there, because now we've cropped past it. Huh, super interesting. Okay, sorry, total deviation of where we were supposed to be going. Let's undo all that and back into that image, and someone asked about the size of the control point. Okay, open this up. I'm going to apply let's go into, we just use Viveza, and add a control point to his face here and change the brightness down a whole bunch. The size of this circle is a general area of influence. It is not like a radial gradient, where in a radial gradient, the beginning is on at 100%, the outer edge of the circle is off at 100%, and it is an even spread from 0 to 100 out to the edge. It is not like that. If I look at the mask in here, it's the easiest way to see what's happening. If I look at the mask, come back here, there we go. You can see that the mask does extend beyond the edge of that circle. So it's not a hard line, but pretty much the main focus of the mask building is happening inside of that circle, and it falls off quickly after that. It is not a hard edge line, but that does control the range of influence of that effect. So if I wanted to have, hitting just the side of his cheek here, I would have to make that pretty small just to do that. Option drag that up to the top here. If I wanted to have one hitting his whole head on the side there, I could expand that out. So you've got these different region of influence, or sphere of influence is what I usually call it, and it is not 100% in, out, on, off, but that is the general area where things get applied. Okay, back to the questions. Carolina says, if you have a series of similar images, can you copy paste the recipe, use an original photo, and apply it to similar pics in the series? A couple ways you can go about doing this. You can save a preset. So let's do this, let's say black and white. It'll make it a little easier to see. Let's say I go into SilverFX Pro, and I will make my own recipe here very, very quickly. So, all right, well, I've already got the border on there. Let's say I go in here and I do a total highlight reduction and a big old structure change and big old structure change. And great, okay, let's say that's my effect. I've worked hard, that's my effect. If I go down to custom here, these are custom presets. I click on the plus and I can call this, I think your name was Carolina, Carolina's preset. Okay, there we go. Save that, apply that. Now I can open up any other image and apply that same preset to it. So I go in, open, let's take this one here, open this, open that as an object, and I can reapply that same filter. SilverFX Pro, I think it'll load the last one without even having to do anything. Let's double check. That might actually be dependent on the tool as well. Yeah, this one didn't. Click on Carolina's preset, and there it is, that's now applied, hit OK. So that's how you would do it, kind of one image at a time. What you can also do is batch this. And the way you batch it is by recording an action. So let me close all of these. We open up this first image again, or whatever, that image. And then I go to actions, which are, that's my history. Oh, they're there. There's the actions. And I create a new action. And we're going to call this Carolina. I hope your name is Carolina. Carolina's action. And I start recording. Now I've got this image already selected. I'm going to apply, go to SilverFX Pro. I don't have to apply the preset at this point. I could just do whatever I want to do. So I'm going to use a preset because I already built it, but I don't have to. I could just do it all by hand. Hit OK. And stop recording that. Now I've got an action that has been saved. I'm going to go ahead and close this and not even save it. Go to the File menu, Automate, Batch, set default action. There it is, Carolina's action. Choose a source. In this case, let's go ahead and we'll create a new folder, batch test, and I'm going to put these 3 photos into it. Okay, back to Photoshop and choose the source is batch test. There we go. What do I want to do? I want to stop for errors, destination, the same folder, save as. Basically, there's nothing I have to do here. Oh, it's going to go to a different place. Let's not go to a different place. Let's go into batch test. Let's do this. We'll do a batch test done. There we go. So they're going to save there. And I think that's all we have to do. Override save as. That doesn't matter because I didn't do a save as. I don't think that matters. I don't do this very often. Hit OK. Okay, so at this point, it's going to open up each image in RAW where I can make any changes to that I want to. I could do it open as an object, and at this point, the script is going to take over. I could batch record the raw processing stage of it as well, but the advice here, the better advice would be to not, so that you can on each raw image make any tweaks that you need. And there's asking me to save it. So you would, again, you could also record the saving in so you don't have to go through this process of actually monitoring it. But anyway, so now it is going through, it's going to do all 3 of those images. So if I wanted it to be completely hands-off, I would have to record the opening and the saving, both as part of the batch. But it's all the same process. Okay, I'm going to stop this because, well, or maybe I'm not. It's just going to do its thing. Bonnie, all right, cancel, stop. Okay. Bonnie, when you switch from Viveza to ColorFX Pro or another Nik program, does it make you or ask you to create another copy of the photo? I keep ending up with a separate file for each filter. I'm not sure why. Superb question. That depends on your workflow to begin with. So if I was using, let's say I was using Photolab for everything. When you're in Photolab and you're starting with a raw file, in fact, let's just do this. Let's just do the workflow. When you start with a raw file, you have to create a TIFF file that gets sent to the plugin. When you apply that plugin, it renders it back to the TIFF. Remember, it's not a smart object, so we don't have the raw file with the smart thing applied to it. We have a whole separate file. So let's go to today's photo collection, and here we go. All right, so we'll use this picture here. We haven't used this one yet. All right, so there's the original image. This is a raw file, RW2, that's a raw file. I'll make some changes to this. Let's go in and let's just make it a little bit darker. Oops, come here, you, open, there we go. Let's make it a little bit darker. Okay, great. And now I wanna send this to a plugin. I click on the Nik Collection button here and I choose which one I'm gonna go to. But before I click on this, notice if you click on settings, you have some choices in here. Process as a TIFF and export, which is the default, that's what we wanna do. You cannot, let's see, for this one, because of the file is a raw file, I can't choose to send the same file off, but we'll see how to do that in a moment. So it's gonna go off as a TIFF, so that's what's gonna happen. We're gonna go to Analog Effects Pro. It is rendering a TIFF file. You might see it pop up here on the bottom before the filter opens. You may or may not, I'm not sure if you'll see it or not, but we'll see it when we come back. It's rendering it, there's your progress bar. Okay, oh yeah, there it is. So there's that TIFF file. So it's just created that TIFF. Now it's opening up into the filter. Let's apply something wild and crazy to this. We are just about to hit the hour, folks. If any of you have to go, I am done with everything I was going to show you, so the rest of this is going to be Q&A. If you don't have any questions, feel free to step out. Thank you very much for attending. Again, I sent you earlier, and I'm going to send it again right now, the all of my contact info, but please, if you haven't yet, please do follow, subscribe, and all that good stuff on YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you have any questions, feel free to hit me up on Twitter. Okay, we're back into here. This is kind of a cool effect, actually. Let's put this right here. Like it. Neat. Okay, sorry. Got to stop playing here. I'm going to save this. Now this is rendering permanently to that TIFF file. I cannot go back and re-edit this. So there's my original raw image, and next to it is that TIFF file. Now let's say I want to take this into black and white. Click on Nik Collection. If I just go click on SilverFX Pro right now, it is going to create another TIFF file. But if I go into settings, oh, actually, totally lying to you. I can't do it from here. Okay, so from here, I cannot send the same TIFF file off for rendering. I thought you could. That's really interesting. Process is, okay, you can't. If you want to send that same TIFF file, so basically not save this one as another version, then you do have to go and do this a different way. You can go to Export to Application. You can choose that photo, that filter. So we're going to do black and white. Oops, it looks like I haven't selected black and white in here, or SilverFX Pro. So let's do that. It's a bit of a roundabout way to do it. What am I looking for? Nik Collection. Nik. There it is. Nik Collection, SilverFX Pro. So now this shows up as a list. Once you've selected it, it's in the list. I'm going to choose, here it goes, export selected files without processing. That's what I was looking for. I thought that we had that option from within here, but apparently not. Export selected files without processing. Now it's going to take that same TIFF file without creating a new one into SilverFX Pro. Anything I do here and hit OK will get rendered back to that same TIFF file. So I'll just leave it as a straight black and white. Let's go ahead and add that preset to it. Hit save. Should be kind of cool. Makes it neat black and white. And now that's it. And I only have that one TIFF file. If I had simply gone there from this Nik Collection button, then it would be rendering out that second TIFF file. So I hope that helps to clear that up. Obviously, I don't know what your host is, but that is essentially what is happening. Jorge, I do the same in color effects and then the app crashes. Well, that's terrible. The same as what? I would say trash preferences reinstall. Jorge, any ideas why? I don't know where oh, I'm way behind on questions because here someone's telling me that was copper. It was copper. Everybody's telling me it's copper. Good. Well, I did have that right. Wow, there's a lot more questions in here. Let me see if I can get to these. Does it make any difference to start in Lightroom, then open Photoshop, and then Nik filters? If you're in Lightroom CC, you have two options. You can open as a Photoshop file, which basically means a TIFF file, which means everything is permanent. Or you can open as a smart object, in which case you get all the advantages that we had here. Or, right, there's three options. Or you can go straight to the filter, which will effectively create a Photoshop file where everything is rendered and it's just pixels and there's no smart object, and whatever you do is applied permanently. You come back into Lightroom and the effect is permanent. So if you want the flexibility of the smart object, the flexibility of being able to re-edit the photo, you have to go through Photoshop and convert to smart object. It's the only way. Otherwise, every effect is permanent. Louise saying, can't you isolate better by changing the size of the control point? Yes, I think you saw that. Somebody else is still getting lag. Sorry about that. Things are out of my control. What is group and ungroup? Group and ungroup allows you to group multiple control points together. So any slider you adjust on one of them affects all of them. And then you can ungroup if you change your mind later. Ray Nichols says, brass is a hard combination of several metals. Copper is a single soft element. There we go. The knocker is probably brass, and the sheathing on the door could be either, but probably brass. Look at that. All these different opinions. Excellent, thank you. Can you change the hue of the red, Jorge asks. Yes, there is a hue slider in there, so that is one of the controls you have, is you could absolutely rotate the hue. To reduce the spillover effect, why not reduce the size of your control point circle? As you saw later on, we can absolutely do that as well. Would you go over how to activate the mask feature? Again, how do you turn it on and off? It is that little itty bitty checkpoint. I'm just going to take this into a filter. It's a little itty bitty checkbox next to the control point in the control point list. It's tiny. It's very kind of hard to see, but it's there. So I add a control point to the sky there, and under my control point list, you'll see this little checkbox. So there's a little mask icon. That little checkbox turns that on or off. And that little mask button will actually do it for all of them at once. So if I add another control point here, this little icon now will turn all the masks on and off, or I can do individual on and off. So that's how that works. All right. Jane says, nice. Nick says it'd be nice to get rid of the booger below her nose. Well, that's just personal. Gary, pull the shadow slider down. Okay, I'm not monitoring the comments as I'm doing it. So if the question comes in or the comment comes in and I'm not seeing it immediately, it's out of context and I don't know where you were. Sorry. Steve Hamilton, would you have more control over that by adding the filter where you want it and then bring it back into Photoshop and adding a mask? Oh yes, I've done that in other shows where I absolutely, you can add, do multiple layers in Photoshop and mask between them. That wasn't part of today's presentation, but I have done that in other shows for sure. That gets really advanced, which is really fun too. Every one of these shows, I'm kind of, some places I go more basic, some are more advanced, some it's just, I've got an hour. I can't just do everything in 1 hour, but I try. Rex, what is workflow to use multiple Nik programs using Lightroom Classic? So I would say if you have Photoshop and you don't mind going into Photoshop, then that gives you the most ultimate flexibility. Otherwise, from Lightroom Classic, you can send to a plugin and bring it back again. And then just like we saw from Photolab, you can choose to either send the photo, to duplicate the photo and send it, or to send that same file. So you can have those multiple stages, or you can just keep editing the same one. You have that same choice inside of Lightroom as well. The workflow is just up to you. Do you want to be able to go back to other previous editions? If so, then duplicate and affect a fly filter to a copy of it. If you don't care about having the old one, then just keep working on the same file. And if you want that ultimate flexibility, use Smart Objects. When you turn on the mask, where do you turn on the mask? Okay, someone already answered that again. Do you have a video on batch processing? Not other than what I just showed you. I did a written tip that is on the, well, actually, I don't know if it's been published yet. Let's take a look. DxO.com blog. A lot of these blog posts on here are mine. Ooh, it doesn't look like it's been updated recently. So no, batch is not yet covered in here. I did write a blog post about batch processing. It just hasn't been published yet. So bookmark this, blog.dxo.com, and check back. Another excellent presentation. Thank you, Kent. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Good. You are quite welcome. Last one, Jorge says, I greatly appreciate your webinars. Enjoy. You are quite welcome. You're teaching us photography, not just a mechanical way, using the Nik Collection moving sliders. Awesome. Will there be more webinars in October and November? I don't know yet. They haven't asked me to do any, but if they do, I most certainly will. But at the moment, the next one, which is next Wednesday, is my last one for a while, I do believe. I think that's right. Anyway, thanks a bunch, everybody. Appreciate it. Again, hit me up on Twitter if you got any questions after this. Otherwise, we're all set. Oh, actually, there, that showed me what is next. So Dan Hughes is doing HDR effects. I'm doing Hidden Detail Sharpener Pro, and that's it. Those are the last ones that are scheduled. So yeah, after that, we'll see what happens. All right, guys, thanks a bunch. See you later. Bye-bye.